Hello, everybody. Welcome to a live stream. Today, I would just like to chit chat for about 30 minutes, whatever you guys want to talk about. I understand that the channel is very small, and so many of you are not going to be watching this live. And I understand that most of you who will watch it will probably watch it later on. You sort of hit the like button if you like and post in the comments because I do read the comments. And today we're going to talk about whatever you want to talk about in terms of religion, apologetics. Protestants, of course, are welcome as long as you're charitable, atheists as well. We'll probably just look at what's going on in the news of last week, like I did last Saturday. But certainly, you're more than welcome to call in, ask a question, in chit chat. I can tell from the reflection here, wearing my University of Alaska shirt. I was a graduate student the University of Alaska. If you guys don't know, yes, not all Alaskans live in igloos. And, the Pope recently went to Iqaluit, which is Nunavut is the new territory that was carved out of Canada about 20 years ago. But I have been blessed to have been to every Canadian province, and I've been to the two at the time Canadian territories, the Yukon and the Northwest Territory, which the Yukon Territory borders Alaska. That's where Dawson, the Great Gold Rush, 1898 is from. But Northwest Territory used to be everything east of that, all the way to Greenland, and then they carved out a new one called Nunavut. And the Pope went there the last part of his tour because he went to visit the Indians in Edmonton, in Alberta, because the Athabascans they occupy kind of that middle area all the way up into Alaska. And then he went to Quebec, which used to be traditional Catholic. Quebec. If you would have gone back, like when Celine Dion was a kid, like 1950s Quebec, would rival Ireland and Malta as probably the most Catholic regions in the world in 1950. And I've been blessed to have been to Quebec 3 times. Most recently was there 2 years ago. I was in Quebec City. I love Quebec City. It's the oldest walled city in North America. It's a gorgeous little town. And I stayed in the city across the river, the St. Lawrence River from it, and had a view of the Chateau Frontenac and the old church there. It was beautiful. I love that town. And you eat a lot of the, what are the fries? The fries are great. The pouton. They love that stuff. That stuff is an acquired taste. It's not as much of an acquired taste as escargot or as some of the Chinese will eat. Aborted fetuses, that's certainly a delicacy. But pouton is pretty big with the French Canadians. And it's just sad. I find it to be very sad to see what's happened to the Quebecois in terms of their faith, because Quebec has its faith has gone down the tubes, and it has nothing to do with the Indian boarding school scandal. It has to do with just cultural Marxism, secular atheism, and all the things that have brought it out in the Western world. And so, you look at Quebec in the 1950s, highly devout, big families. And I remember when I was there 2 years ago, I met a woman. I'm trying to think how I met her. Oh, she was at a coffee shop. I just went up to her, started talking to her. And I was there for a week. So we met like 3-4 times. And I would just talk to her. She was a Quebecois, Quebecan, maybe. And I would just talk to her about what happened to Quebec. And, we'd have good conversations. And she was telling me, and everything I've seen in the news corroborates this, is that the French Canadians have just gone. It was mass exodus very fast. And similar with Ireland, Ireland allows abortion now. Is one of the most staunchest Catholic countries in Europe. And super secularist now, very sad. There was a point during the lockdown where you could not celebrate a mass in public for a year and a half. They did not allow it at all. And so probably the most Catholic countries now in Europe are probably going to be Hungary, Slovakia, Poland. Poland is so used to be so staunchly Catholic, and now they're having to fight off a lot of the cultural Marxist nonsense that's being pushed by Western Europe. And of course, that's part of the European Union, is that you take that money, it's like public education there. You take that money, then you're going to have to take their curriculum, and it's kind of the same thing with the EU. But either way, post in comments if you like. Let us look at Catholic News Agency and see what's going on in the news. Please post if you've ever been to Canada or if you have a favorite Catholic country. I was going back to Alaska. Sorry. So Alaska has 600,000 people, 650,000 people. Most of them live in Anchorage, which is like it's a smaller version of Seattle. And the old Phillips saying was the border of Alaska starts 30 miles outside of Anchorage. So the belief that the Anchorageans were not real Alaskans, they were essentially douchebag Seattleites. And then the Anchorage people would always look down on the rest of Alaska as being, just guys who live in huts and Indians and Eskimos who live in igloos. So there's kind of that tension there. But yeah, it is not the least populated state in America, believe it or not. You look at Vermont, Wyoming, are all around that number, but 600,000 is crazy small. I mean, I live outside of a city that's got double that number. It's beautiful, beautiful state. All right, let's see what's going on. Please let me know if there is a Catholic site that you like more than Catholic News Agency. It's not like I really look up. Thank you, Anna Domina. Appreciate that. Wyoming is beautiful. The eastern side is more like Dances with Wolves, high Great Plains. You have Devil's Tower up in the northeast part of it. Western Idaho, of course, is West Wyoming, I should say, is kind of the more popular one. You got the Tetons, and I would say the Tetons actually is a more beautiful national park than Yellowstone. And Domino, if there's anything you want to talk about Catholic, I'm assuming you're a Catholic, given your handle is Anno Domini. But if there's anything in particular you want to talk about. All right, let's see what's going on. Oh, Francis on birth control. Can the teaching be changed? Let's look at this. Francis is probably most famous for the airplane interviews. He's done this so many times where he'll do these airplane interviews, typically with secularist/atheist reporters or news agencies. And then afterwards say something somewhat controversial, very controversial. It gets into the atheistic newspaper. Then the people go to the Vatican for a comment or for a confirmation. No confirmation, no comment. You saw this with Biden when Biden came and received the Eucharist and or reputedly received the Eucharist. And they went to the Vatican news office and they're like, hey, is it true that Pope Francis, or maybe it wasn't the Eucharist, maybe it was like supporting abortion. I can't remember. No, it probably wouldn't have been said. That's even too far for Pope Francis. I think it was receiving the Eucharist. Or I think Francis said it was okay for Biden to receive the Eucharist. And this is before Cordileone kind of excommunicated Nancy Pelosi. Didn't excommunicate her, but told her she can't receive the Eucharist. And so they went to the Vatican office to confirm what Biden said. And last I checked, no comment. This is classic Francis MO. How many dubias has Francis responded to anytime conservative cardinals want a clarification on some motu proprio? He never answers any of those. Anyway, so let's look what Frank, I want to call him Frankie. We have to respect the office. So he's doing his airplane interview, right? All right. A journalist asked him about the possibility of a development in church's teaching on contraception. I wonder if this journalist was a lefty. Probably was. Quote, this is very timely, but know that dogma, morality is always in a path of development, but development in the same direction. All right, let's see what else he says. That is it. It consolidates with times, it expands and consolidates, becomes more steady, but always progressing. Oh, watch out that word. That is why the duty of theologians is research, theological reflection. You cannot do with a no in front of it. The magisterium will be the one to say no. I'm glad he defers to the magisterium on that. Pope Francis also just reached a controversy over a book published by the Vatican's publishing house, which discussed the possible legitimacy of contraception in certain cases. That's the name of the book right here. There are the proceedings of a Congress, and in Congress there are hypotheses when they discuss among themselves and make proposals, blah, blah, blah. Okay, look, this is worrisome. The dogma is always a path of development, but development in the same direction. Okay, this, as the vicar of Christ, this is what he should have said. Contraception is an inherent evil. It's always been an inherent evil and will always be an inherent evil. Next question. That should have been the response. But this is very Pope Francis, right? Just kind of vague. He intentionally doesn't really communicate well. He kind of likes to be on the fence on everything. I mean, if somebody asked a question about contraception, he should just been like, no, it's a grave evil. Because look, even if he doesn't believe that contraception is a grave evil, remember, you are the head of the Catholic Church, so you have to parrot what the deposit of faith and the ordinary magisterium has taught forever, that it's wrong. So don't give us this mealy mouth, say, no, contraception is innately, inherent, morally wrong act. And look, I mean, Humane Vitae, God, we could say we want about Saint Paul VI, but we could say we want. Humane Vitae was dead on. The only encyclical he ever wrote. He got so much blowback because he went against the kind of the revolutionaries that wanted him to say that it was okay. But I mean, he was dead on about what was going to lead if we started embracing contraception. He was dead on. Pius VI warned of serious social consequences. The widespread use of contraception became accepted. He predicted that it would lead to infidelity. Yes, higher rates of infidelity. Lowering morality. No one can deny that. A loss of respect for women. Absolutely. And the belief that humans have unlimited dominion over their body. Yeah, I mean, look. Essentially, when you take away the procreative act from sex, from the unitive act, and we have episodes coming out on this in traditional marriage, you're essentially just masturbating inside each other. I mean, that's essentially, for lack of, pardon my French, not to be too gauche, but once you take away the unitive from the procreative and it just becomes unitive, which is essentially a translation for the pleasure that comes from the marital act, then you're essentially using each other for sexual gratification without the possible fruit or consequence, whatever you want to call it, of conception. And so it leads to the kind of degradation of the marital act to essentially just be something that's done for sexual pleasure. And this in itself undermines the traditional view of marriage, which has always been the procreation and education of children. And it becomes, once you take away that definition, last really seen by Casa Canubi by Pope Pius XI in 1930, then it all becomes about love, pitter patter, sex feels good. And once you kind of have that definition of marriage, then why not have homosexual marriage? Why not have open marriages? Why not have polygamy and all these things, right? If it's all consenting adults and it's all about love. Oh, yes, very good. Well, you can tell us what your denomination is if you like. We can't use AD in the history books. They're using CE now. You probably know this already. Your handle is being turned obsolescent. Now it's BCE and CE. So we'll see. This is Francis at his best, quote / worst, in terms of just being ambiguous about the deposit of faith. Let's see what else we got going on in the CNA. Robert Barron installed as Bishop of Rochester. So for those of you who don't know, Robert Barron is probably, I don't know, but in terms of like YouTube subscribers, he is one of the biggest evangelists. Let's see how many subscribers he has now. And he's had, well, I mean, look, he's got 500, let's see. 528,000 subscribers. This dude is making bank. Like he's about to do a live stream right now. He did a video yesterday, got 15,000 views. So if you guys are not familiar with Bishop Barron is probably, I would say that he's the, I wouldn't, and I don't mean this with lack of charity, he's kind of like the wannabe Fulton Sheen of this generation. And he has the YouTube channel, World on Fire. It's very popular among Catholics. My take on Bishop Barron, and he recently got promoted / demoted, depending on how you want to look at it, I would say it's more of a promotion if you got moved to be, let's say, Archbishop of a large city like LA. Even though LA does not have a cardinature, believe it or not. San Diego recently got a cardinature, but LA doesn't. Gomez, who used to be the Archbishop of where I live, is the Archbishop of LA, but they didn't give him the red hat because Gomez is perceived to be a little conservative. But they gave it to the guy in San Diego who recently came out. I think it was Barron or Martin. I think it was Father Martin who wrote an editorial in the Wall Street Journal last week talking about how Catholics have to make abortion not be the only issue when it comes to social justice issues. And in the article, they quote the cardinal, I can't remember his name, the new cardinal of San Diego, who was essentially reinforcing what Father Martin said. But to me, it's a promotion. If you're promoted to be the Archbishop of, I don't know, Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, Houston. I understand a lot of these are cardinal bishops. But Rochester, is it like you're even getting St. Paul, Minnesota? You're getting Rochester? No offense to that small diocese. But so he got moved over there. So now he's going to be busy, hopefully busy, being an actual bishop and being a shepherd of all the priests in that diocese. So I don't know. I'm sure, other people, other Catholic people like Marshall and all these people have talked about Bishop Barron's promotion to motion. But my take on Barron is, and to be fair, I have not watched a lot of World on Fire videos. I've probably seen maybe 20 in my entire life. I think Barron, from what I understand, from what I remember, he's never said anything that is as egregiously embarrassing and cringeworthy as something like Father Martin has said. Father Martin, to me, is just typical classic leftist Jesuit. But Barron, to me, there's something about him, and I mean this in charity, it's that there's something a little unctuous about him. There's something a little oily about him. And there's something about him where I think he's too like caught up in the fame of World on Fire and having all these subscribers. And I think it's got to him. And I think his message is Catholic. Don't get me wrong. And you guys can post in the comments later if he's ever said anything that's been openly non-Catholic or against the deposit of faith. But there's just something where it's like the moderate Catholics love Barron. I think the trad cats are like, and look, anybody like with EWTN, you can nitpick EWTN a lot. Anyone that brings people to Holy Mother Church, it's a great thing. So I'm not going to nitpick any evangelists out there who are bringing people to Holy Mother Church. But with both Barron, that's just my personal. It's just like when I watch him, it's like, I don't know. I don't get that with Sheen. You watch the old videos of Sheen. Sheen should be a saint. That's up to Holy Mother Church, of course. But you can see the sanctity in Sheen. When I watch Barron, I just don't feel that, brothers and sisters. And I don't mean that outside of charity. I don't know. There's just. Thank you. See, you're on it. Yeah, he just became a cardinal. He's a kind of a, we don't like to use the term liberal or conservative Catholics because you're either a practicing Catholic or you're not, but he's perceived to be a liberal Catholic. Francis, one of Francis' guys. Oh, you're Baptist. Sweet. Well, go check out all the videos we've done on, I don't think we have one like singling out the Baptist thing, but I mean, if you are an adherent of Sola Fide and Sola Scriptura, we definitely have videos on it. I mean, I would tell you, if 100 people went to a Latin Mass, 80 of them would stay and never go back. What? We got a call?
Call from Mike from Philadelphia.
Hello.
Hey, Greg, it's Mike from Philadelphia. How are you?
I'm doing well, brother. What's up, Mike? I got a question or comment?
I actually had one question first, but when you said something a little while ago, now I actually have two questions.
Take your time, man. You're probably going to be the only call, and I like it when people call in. So what's your first one?
Good. So my first one is that I was out with my friends last night, and we were having dinner, and I mentioned to them that I have been once in a while going to different rites. As you know, I go to the TLM, and I've been going to, once in a while, I go to a couple different rites because I went to them just to see what they were like, and I find them enriching. I mean, I'm not planning to switch to them, but the thing is, I just liked it, and the guy sitting next to me was like, "You shouldn't do that," but he didn't give me a reason why.
These are Catholic friends?
Yeah, they're Catholic. Yeah, in fact, I found out there's an Armenian Catholic church near me, and I want to go see what that's like, just out of curiosity. I was at the Syro Malabar rite a couple weeks ago. I completely had no idea. Their parish name is St. Thomas, and it was their feast of title. So they had a great procession. I mean, it was in Malayalam, so I didn't understand a word of it, but I knew what was going on. So I was.
Let me ask you. Let me ask you really quick. At the Malabar Church, were you the only white person, or were there some other token white people?
Yeah, I'll have to email you some pictures that I took there from from it. It's really good. The procession was outside, so yeah, I'll email you some pictures to your email address. So yeah. So I don't know why you didn't say why I shouldn't go. I mean, there's an ordinariate church 20 minutes from my TLM parish, and we get invitations to go to Vespers there all the time, and some of us go. So I don't see what the problem is going once in a while. I mean, I've been to the Ukrainian rite, you know.
Well, look, so I'll tell you this: there's nothing in church law that says you can't go to a different rite. So I don't know. Are these guys just Latin rite? They like Novus Ordo Catholics or what?
No, these are hardcore TLM people.
Okay. Well, you know, maybe they think like a lot of TLM, there is a certain amount of hubris and pride with the TLM crowd. So they probably think, why would you go to any other rite just to check it out when you have the perfect mass there? Now, where I live, we don't really have any Eastern rite. I think we have a Byzantine Catholic. No, we have a Maronite, but the Maronite church looks very modern. And so I don't have any interest to go. But if I lived in a city that did have other rites, I would go on occasion out of curiosity, just to see what it's like. You know, I don't think there's any inherent problem with it, but they didn't give you a reason why you shouldn't be going to these other rites?
No, the guy didn't. I asked him, I said, what's wrong with it? I mean, it's not like I'm gonna change over. I mean, it's you know, and it's just it was where the people there were nice, and you know, I found it to be very fulfilling. It was different. The Syro Malabar rite, to do chanting and things like that. So, I mean, the Cat Stevens morning has broken has kind of creeped in with them. But the thing is that overall it was still very reverent. You know, they were still, the priest was still chanting, and the if you want to call it the choir was chanting back in response. So it was, you know, so I didn't think it was that bad. So
I think my understanding is by canon law. I think maybe Father Mitch Pacwa mentioned this, like, because he's a Maronite. I think they want you to stay in the rite that you're in. I think that's my understanding. And so maybe. Yeah,
I've heard that.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. If you get married to someone from a different rite, they want to try to preserve the rights of their rules. That you really should go to the other rite, or I don't know how that would work, but yeah, you're right about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's nothing wrong if you want to become, let's say, a Maronite Catholic. I think there is some sort of like registration paperwork that you will become a Maronite Catholic. Maybe it is to preserve those smaller rites, you know, because they're so tiny. Yeah. What's your other question?
Yeah. Oh, so when you were talking about just about, you know, the purpose of marriage, the old purpose of marriage was the procreation and education of children, and the mutual aid and comfort of the spouse, and the quieting of concupiscence, and those last two are a distant second and third from the first one. So, I mean, theoretically speaking, if you take it, none of it mentions romantic love. So theoretically, if you take it to its logical conclusion, you could just be matched up. I mean, you could get a discernment from God that that you are meant to marry this person, but you have no romantic love with them. And theoretically, if you take it to its logical conclusion, your relationship would just, you know, especially, you know, when rendering the marital debt, it's reduced to basically some sort of clinical act, for lack of a better way of putting it, because you just don't have that romantic love towards that person. I mean, does that make sense? Or am I taking it too far? Am I taking it ad absurdum, whatever that phrase is? You know what I'm saying?
I think we got to look like historically, not just in Christianity, but in other cultures, arranged marriages were very common because, again, like it was not about romanticism, and such a romanticism destroyed Catholic matrimony, in my opinion. But it was all about dynastic lines, if you're talking about aristocracy, but even just like with lower classes, it was more about, like property rights and so forth. So the idea of love was not important, but that's not to say like when two people got together, that doesn't mean that they didn't eventually fall in love or were sexually attracted to one another. But the understanding was, since this bond is indissoluble, we need to find a way to make it work out. You kind of see this talked about, and again, I would not recommend this show because it is sexual. It does have sex in it. But Bridgerton, the Netflix show, kind of does talk about that because some of the protagonists, when they get married, are not really in love with each other. But it is mentioned. I think the mother of Daphne mentions it. It's just like, well, you will grow to love each other. You will grow to be sexually attracted to one another because you really don't have another option. You can, of course, marry somebody and then have affairs on the side and all that. But of course, that's not recommended. But I think your example is more of the kind of like the drastic, put a hole in the sheet and, do what we need to do to have children. But I think a lot of those couples did learn to at least respect, if not, and again, what is love? Love is really doing acts and doing what's best for the other person and not corrupting them or leading into sin. So when we talk about love, we're talking about like romantic love. But yeah, I mean, it worked. That system worked as a whole in terms of what was good for culture, what was good for society. And then since we've brought in the idea of romantic love and pitter patter, I mean, and then throw in, of course, no fault divorce and some of the other things, look what's happened to marriage now.
True, yeah. And, the funny thing is that, as the couples that I know at my parish that have gotten married, I mean, they talk about how they love each other. Like the one couple is like, they got married like a year and a half ago. It's like the woman's like, the love of my life proposed to me. So, I mean, there was something there more than just some sort of discernment that objectively that they were meant to be together just to have babies. So, I don't know. It's just kind of a weird thing. I think it would feel uncomfortable, at least for me anyway, that if I went into a marriage, saying that, God is discerned. I've discerned that God wants this, but I don't feel any attraction to. So I don't know. It's just something about it that just doesn't sit right with me because it's such an important. Well, I mean, look,
nowadays though, I don't know if you think you would get a vocation to marry a woman that you weren't attracted to. I mean, do you think that? And this is the Protestants. Not all of them, of course. They would have like, God told me to. I got this, this message from God too. In the Catholic world, we don't really kind of think that way in terms of God speaking to us. But do you think God would give you a vocation to marry a woman that you don't find attractive at all?
Well, I mean, I just think just based on just the basic definition as we understand it as traditional Catholics. I mean, if you go down that road, it eventually leads to that, as absurd and as difficult as it sounds. So, maybe I'm just going too far into the absurd or something like that. So
I would say like being in love with somebody you're thinking of marrying, and this is so countercultural to say this, but to me, it's not that important to be in love with the person that you're going to marry, because if you have similar values, like in this example, we're both traditional Catholics, we both believe in the indissolubility of marriage, and our values are lined up in every way. Ultimately, that's what's the most important thing. I can learn to fall in love with you in the erotic love, romantic love, but that's not the most important thing. When we put that first before the values, before Catholic values or whatever values, political values, that's where the problem is. And you see that everywhere in the West now, where it's Tinder hookup mindset. Let's bang, let's have sex. And then, let's see if our values mix. No, I think the values line up, then, that's the number one thing, because if you marry this person, that they're not going to divorce you, you're not going to divorce them, and no matter what, we'll make this work. And yes, I will learn to fall in love with you, and we will have maybe erotic love and all that thing. But when we put the erotic love first, that's where we've seen just.
And even if it's the romantic and erotic love happens to develop at the same time, you're keeping the main goal in perspective. That's just kind of like an added bonus too. So I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're in courtship with a woman, of course we know we shouldn't be fornicating with the woman, but we're in active courtship. It benefits for sure if you find her attractive. Absolutely. And then again, it's so countercultural, but the idea of courting and then we'll finally get to have the marital act and consummate our marriage on our wedding night. It's such a beautiful thing, right? It goes back and harkens to the way we did it for centuries. And I think that's the way it should be done. By the way, anything else you want to talk about?
No, I just want to say thank you again. Thank you. It was good talking to you. I think it was about 7 or 8 months ago on the phone. I'll send you an email with a detachment with some of the pictures from the Sierra Malabar. I'll send them to you.
Cool. So, thank you. God bless.
Right.
See you, Mike.
Take care. Bye.
I bring up if you're going to be the only white person at the Malabar. The Malabar is the Indian rite, so it's not surprising that their church is named St. Thomas because I don't think it's sacred tradition. I think it's tradition says that St. Thomas went to evangelize and was martyred in India, and so it makes sense. And that Catholic Indian church has existed for 2,000 years, and I mention that because. That's one of the things I mentioned in the episode, why do Protestants church jump? A lot of them will church jump eventually to like Orthodox. But if they go, in most of the Orthodox churches, and you can say this about Eastern Rite too, they're very ethnocentric. So if you go to a Maronite, there's going to be a lot of Lebanese people. And if you go to a Malabar Rite, it's a lot of Indian people. You're like the one white dude or white woman or, black, whatever you are. And that cultural difference does tend to, it's not always, think of My Big Fat Greek Wedding, right? Can be attention. So a lot of these people will eventually go to Catholicism, which is the truly universal church. I mean, we have every race in the world in large numbers. I'm glad that Bishop Barron brought you the faith, brother. What was it about him that, if you're still here, Damien, I don't know if you're still here, but what was your last stumbling block? Casey, I saw your interaction here with Anno Domini. Look, Anno Domini. So, Sola Scriptura. I would say the quickest retort is, and there's videos on it, but if the Bible was meant to be the guidebook for Christian living, first of all, where does it say in the Bible that the Bible is the guidework for Christian living? It doesn't say that anywhere. And secondly, where in the Bible is the canon of Scripture enumerated? It's not. Where in the Bible, New Testament, Old Testament, does it say that this book deserves to be in the canon? It doesn't. So you need the church, a living, existing church, to determine these things. And so the Bible, of course, is exceedingly important to Catholicism. It's one of the 3 pillars of Catholicism. It comes from sacred oral tradition. John talks about the end of John, how these are just some of the things that were written about the exploits of Jesus Christ. So we know in the early church, there was an episode I did how, what did the early church do before they had the New Testament? Because there's like a good 50-year period from the death of Jesus to when the early manuscripts of the Gospels and the epistles were being circulated to these early churches. They didn't have the New Testament. So, how did they function? Well, they functioned through sacred oral tradition. They functioned through the apostles that were still living, and then the disciples of the apostles, the early bishops. You see this, the qualifications of a good bishop, good deacon in 1 Timothy. You see Paul talk about this in Titus, to tell Titus about picking good successors and so forth. You see it I think it's in 2 Thessalonians. He talks about adhering to tradition that's been passed to you from the apostles. So there was this period where we didn't have the New Testament at all, and those churches were thriving. They didn't need to have the New Testament. So these are just a couple of things. But in short, Sola Scriptura didn't exist, and nobody believed in it for the first 1,500 years until Martin Luther essentially came up with the idea of it. And then from there, the Protestants, not all the Protestants, but some of the Protestants kind of whipped up in that and believe in that. But it's not something that's historically rooted in early Christianity. And you'll never find any church fathers who ascribe to that belief. And I mean that in all charity. Damien, what was it? What was your last hurdle? What Protestant denomination were you? And then what was like the final thing that brought you into Holy Mother Church? It doesn't have to be about Barron, but just like what was it? Oh, so while he's bringing that up, let's look one more time. So Bishop Barron. Let's see what else is in Catholic news, and then we'll finish up this live stream. So Bishop Barron got installed. Hopefully he's a great bishop. We need good bishops. Okay, let me tell you, I was very disappointed with our church leadership during COVID when they were now giving out religious exemptions for the COVID vaccine. That was exceedingly disappointed. I personally, some of you know this, maybe you don't know this, but I've always been against, which I like to euphemistically call the devil's serum. And I've always been against the devil's serums, not just the COVID one, but all of them. But you might not agree with me on that, but we really don't have time to talk about that here. But there was a time during COVID where some people could lose their job without getting the vaccine. And so they went and asked for religious mandates. And, Pope Francis didn't do us many favors when he was essentially encouraging people to get the vaccine, even though the COVID, what had a 0.4 death rate. If anyone got infected, it was a 0.4 death rate. And, I mean, don't even get me started closing the churches. We didn't close the churches during the bubonic plague. We didn't close the churches during Spanish influenza, but we closed it for a virus that killed 0.4% of people get infected by it, and especially when you need to have the churches open during that time. But either way, it was disappointing that it was exceedingly difficult to get religious exemptions, and most people cannot get them from their priests or the bishops because they would say, well, Pope Francis is encouraging this. And I always felt like we know that the main vaccine, which was, I think, Pfizer, right? The Pfizer Moderna one, didn't have aborted fetal cells in it, but it came from a line of aborted fetal cells. So to me, and again, I'm not the Pope here, but to me, it kind of sent this message. Get a piece of food on my shirt. It kind of sent this message where abortion's always wrong, right? We say it's always wrong. Rape and incest, always wrong. But if it somehow leads to a vaccine, then it's okay. To me, that's essentially the message that was being sent. Let's see if you broke. It was the Eucharist, knowing that Christ is truly present. His way changed everything for me. Yes. I did an episode like a week ago how we had the Eucharist before we had the New Testament. And you can see this played out in Scripture. You don't even have to go to church fathers. You don't even have to go to Justin Martyr, Ignatius of Antioch. They write about the real presence of the Eucharist. You can read this in 1 Corinthians 11. Paul talks about it right there. So, yeah, I mean, why? There's no more personal relationship with Jesus Christ than receiving his body and blood. It is truly, truly beautiful to receive the graces that come from the Eucharist if you're in a state of grace. I know somebody who recently, I was talking to them, and they were going to go to a Catholic wedding, and they were Protestant. And the guy was like, I'm going to receive the Eucharist at this Catholic wedding. And a friend of mine and I, we told him, it's like, well, you're not Catholic and you should be receiving the Eucharist. Well, he's like, I went to a Catholic funeral and I received it there. I'm like, well, maybe you could call it that invincible ignorance because you didn't know, but now you know. We try to lay out the reasons why Protestants can't be receiving the Eucharist. And look, the majority of Catholics shouldn't be receiving the Eucharist either unless you're in a state of grace. And let's be real, how many Catholics under the age of 40 who are not married, but even if you're married, are in a state of grace if you think of the sins, the mortal sins that the typical concupiscent human is dealing with. But, this is kind of this idea. Well, I think the Protestants kind of have this idea where when they go to a Methodist or Lutheran or Presbyterian, it's all, we're all essentially Christian denominations. We're all Christian brothers. We can all receive the Eucharist. But I think they don't understand, in the Catholic world, it's fundamentally different because we really do believe in the real presence of the Eucharist. And receiving the Eucharist is a public testimony to everybody that you are a Catholic. So if you receive, and we have an episode on this about Protestants receiving the Eucharist in secret. If you're receiving the Eucharist when you're not supposed to because you're Protestant, not only are you drinking from the cup of judgment because you're likely in a mortal sin, and also because you're being duplicitous because you are going up there knowing that you're a Protestant and you shouldn't be receiving it if you don't have invincible ignorance. But the thing is, like, well, if you want to receive the Eucharist, just become a Catholic. And I think it was Father Trujillo one time mentioned a good analogy. It's like, if you're a Canadian and I'm an American, I cannot run for office in Canada because I'm not a Canadian citizen, nor as a Canadian citizen can someone run for office in America. And it's separate things. I mean, we have a lot of similar cultural similarities between Canada and the United States and so forth, but they are separate countries. And so to receive the Eucharist, for example, you would have to become a citizen of the United States to receive it. But I'm glad that was the thing. So just make sure you're in a state of grace and examine your conscience. And if you're not sure, don't receive the Eucharist and just get the blessing, because it's better just to be safe. We only have to receive the Eucharist one time a year. Ideally, we want to receive it more. Ideally, we want to be going to daily mass and be in a state of grace. But I'm glad you converted. Back in the bosom of Holy Mother Church, because all your ancestors at one point were Catholic, Damien. Every European's ancestors at one point were Catholic, because the Catholic Church was the only Christian church for 1,000 years. And really, I would go 1,500 years, because most Europeans are not Orthodox. They're not from Asia Minor, Greece, and later Russia. Good for you. So you didn't take the devil's serum. Look at that. I had told people in my life that at my job, which is kind of virtual, we're going to mandate it. I would have told them, yeah, well, I'm leaving. I would have done what Kyrie did. Kyrie Irving is. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So what'd you do? Did she take the double serum? Yeah, Pope Francis didn't do us any favors. I understand like the political expediency that he was kind of behind, like as the head of not just the Catholic Church, but really he is the most visible Christian leader. He's kind of in this pocket. And I'm not going to give this cynical view how he's a new world order shill, globalist, radical leftist who's trying to put the church in a pause. I know the SETI view. I know the far right Natchat view. But if you just take him for his word, as a leader of the Christian church, you have this pandemic happening, and the vaccines available, and I could see how he would want to bow to political pressure to that. I just think that, again, this is not necessarily faith and morals. I just think he handled it poorly. Oh, your parents were Armenian Orthodox? Yeah. Well, I mean, again, the Orthodox didn't exist. They're all Catholics. Well, Mike, what would you like to discuss in terms of Catholic stuff? What do you, at least from circa 380, what? Your father was? All right, what time are we at? 43 minutes here. All right, so we're going to be finishing up here pretty soon, unless someone wants to call in or discuss something. Again, I would recommend, if you have Amazon Prime, to go watch the Scorsese movie Silence. I did a review on it a couple of weeks ago. And of course, Amazon also has Superbook, which is a good cartoon made by Protestants, but it's a good cartoon for kids in terms of learning about Bible history, Bible stories. I think EWTN needs to do a better job on making animation stories for children. I think they're still lacking. I just the writing and the graphics are not up there, but hopefully they'll get better. Let me check the comments. Yeah, I mean, I think that is the first country that, first kingdom, I suppose, that took Christianity as his official religion. What's the Roman Empire didn't go to about 380 AD. And you think about the 4th century, they really should have I think I've talked about this before. That's a good century to do like a mini series, because you think of all the things going on in the 4th century. You look at Diocletian's persecutions, which is the worst of the 10 persecutions that the church had at the very beginning of the 300s. And then you have Constantine coming in. He legalizes Christianity. So now we can use public buildings for the mass instead of being in private buildings. And then by 380, it goes from being legalized to becoming the official religion of the empire. But also in the 4th century, you're dealing with the Arian heresy, and that was rampant. So you're dealing with that. And you have some of the greatest saints coming out of the 4th century from the East and the West. You have like Gregory Nyassa, you have young St. Augustine, you have St. Ambrose, you have St. Jerome, you have Athanasius, maybe was still alive. That was more early 300s. It's a great century that's really juicy. If some streaming service would put in the money to do a very pro-Christian show. All right, last question here before we go. Why doesn't God come settle the countless denomination issue? I don't know. I don't talk to God. I don't know. God doesn't tell me these things. We do know that Christ intended to only have one church. He founded one church. He says, "Upon you, Peter, I'll build my church." We know in the Koine Greek, he doesn't use the word plural. St. Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 2 how we need to preach about the unity of one church. So yeah, the intention that we can tell was that there was the intention of only having one visible church. Now, why did God allow denominationalism? Well, I mean, this goes back to free will. He gives people the choice to be heretics or break away. So we ultimately don't have the answer to that. And like with a lot of questions when it comes to like human suffering or why does God allow this, normally a greater good somehow comes out of it, like with suffering. Like, why does God allow my wife to die or my dog to die or something? Typically 5-10 years down the road, you see a greater good that comes out of suffering, and typically you have a deeper spiritual life because of it. But ultimately, these are questions that are existential, and clearly I don't have a pipeline to God the Father to ask him this question. But it's typically free will. And the Catholic Church does not teach that Protestants are hell-damned. It does not teach that. Now, there are a lot of Protestant sects that will tell you that Catholics are hell-damned, but again, that's free will, and we can't control their theology at all. Jerome, I was at Ambrose. So if you look at the 4 doctors of the church, Ambrose was that dude. If you imagine seeing Ambrose preaching in Milan, I am very confident he used some profanity. He was like the old school preachers. He was a badass. He was just such a great saint, but he was hardcore. Yes, he does have some pretty strong anti-Semitic statements, but that was very normal in early Christianity. And again, we don't have time to talk about that or the reason why of that. But he was a great guy. Jerome kind of had a little of St. Augustine early life. He was a little of the, And then eventually he had some scandal in Rome. He was a patron of St. Damasus, or St. Damasus patronized him, another great saint. Probably most famous for giving us the first official canon of the New Testament, or I should say of the whole Bible. Even though St. Augustine had done the Council of Carthage and Hippo, but it's like 370s. But Council of Rome, Damasus gave us the first full official list. Even though the early church knew the canon, it wasn't officially like proclaimed by the Pope until 380. Like a lot of things, like the popes don't have to preach infallibly on something. Normally they only do that if it's something that is in controversy. So you look at the early ecumenical councils, there was a lot of Christology controversies going back to Arianism. So you needed all these early ecumenical councils that are recognized both by the Orthodox and the Catholics. And we have episodes here on Nicaea, Constantinople I, Ephesus, Chalcedon, and most of those dealt with Christology. So there had to be a lot of meetings on that. There were no meetings on the veneration of saints or the Marian dogma because every Christian believed those things. So there's no need to have it. And so you didn't see until later on in the 19th and 20th century some of the Marian dogma being officially dogmatized or officially pronounced. But yeah, there was no need for it. But yeah, the early church, we have episodes here. The early church, probably by early 100s, had the kind of the official canon. There were some books that eventually were taken out, like the Shepherd of Hermes and the Didache. Some people had the Didache in there, but the canon was kind of established. And we know Luther later on, he took out 7 of the Old Testament books, but he also wanted to take out quite a lot of the New Testament books. He wanted to take out James because it didn't jive with Solo Fide. He called it an epistle of straw. He told that to Melanchthon, his sidekick. And Melanchthon was the guy who was like, and this is in the 1520s. I mean, you can find this in Luther biographies. Melanchthon was kind of like, yeah, that probably won't jive well in the PR world to be taking out James. He wanted to take out Hebrews. He wanted to take out Revelation and some other books. But Luther, who was known to be a mercurial, obsessive compulsive, overly scrupulous man, who probably would be diagnosed bipolarism today, even in his judgment, he decided in his early Lutheran church not to take out those books, which was probably really smart. Thank you for the list. Yes. Syro-Jerusalem. Yes. Also, Eusebius, I think, was writing his church history I think he's more 2nd century. Gregory of Nazianzus, Gregory of Nyassa, those are big East Side saints. But certainly 4th century is a great time. We have again, I don't want this live stream to go long. We have an episode on this, Mike. We do have non-Christian people that testify to the existence of Jesus Christ. You can look this up. Josephus was a very well-known Jewish historian, probably the most famous Jewish historian of all time. He's probably most famous for writing the testimonies of the destruction of the temple in AD 70, how the Jews were essentially wiped out. But in his writings, he testifies the existence of Jesus, the man. And then we have Tacitus over in the Roman area, also testifying the existence of a man named Jesus. So absolutely, there's non-Christian contemporaries that we're talking about. We have an episode on this. So, Mike, I mean, I understand you're a skeptic. I'm totally fine with that because you're posting in charity, which is great. You're not some troll. What I would tell you, if you're open to Christianity, in particular Catholic Christianity, go to the channel and probably go to the playlists and click on Apologetics 101. And there's probably by this point like 120 episodes. And there's different topics. And a lot of things that you're bringing up, like did Constantine create the church? Did the church inherit pagan customs? A lot of these kind of classic questions that have been interesting in the channel. So I'd recommend you go check those out. All right, I got to finish because I got to go do some ejercicio this Saturday morning. God bless. I'm going to Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Take care. Love you guys.